I'm Rabbi David Mason. Welcome to Muswell Hill Synagogue. As you can see, the beautiful modernist Art Deco building is behind you on Tetherdown in Muswell Hill. This has been here since about 1965, this building, and this community of Muswell Hill goes back actually about 100 years itself. I'm really pleased today, and I'm going to hand over to Beth to do introductions, to have some great speakers and a great organization and a good friend in Jenny Nemco, whose family are friends of mine and my brothers, and actually have members in the Silbigers, who are members who passed away in the last 2 years, who are members of this very community. Valerie and Clive, dear Valerie and Clive, who were great characters, were members of this synagogue, and only recently we had the stone setting as well. So what I'll do is I'm going to hand over first, asking to unmute, to our very own Beth. You have to unmute, Beth.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome, members, non-members, and everybody else. This is nearly Shabbat on the Hill. It's a program that we've been running since lockdown, and we have some great speakers each week, but we're very happy that you're here with us this evening because we've got a great lineup. We've got Jenny Nemco from TalkMatters with Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Noor Awad. We're very, very happy to welcome you, and I'll hand over to Jenny.
Good evening to everyone, and thank you all so much for coming here this evening. And thank you, Rabbi David, for inviting me to talk about TalkMatters, my new initiative, and to have the opportunity in a few minutes' time to introduce you to Roots, one of the initiatives that TalkMatters is promoting. Know the heart of a stranger, seeing you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This is what TalkMatters is all about. Treating the stranger well, the same way we would treat each other, meeting, talking, and sometimes disagreeing with each other. But how is that possible when we have so little understanding of that stranger's world? Because we have not had the opportunity to meet him or her. Most Jews and Arabs don't mix socially. The identity of both groups are built on a denial of each other, a state of mind, almost as though each side is invisible to the other. There's a word I came across recently that sums it up. I actually can't remember the word, but I know it was about closing your mind to things that are too difficult to deal with, a kind of blindness, a really like it just being easier to see the enemy. And in some ways, I understand that. Essentially, what we hear is Israelis are under existential threat and have the right to secure themselves. And if we have the opportunity to listen to the Palestinian view, we'd probably hear Palestinians are under occupation and have the right to resist. A lose-lose situation that reflects the deep insecurities felt on both sides, unable to become a win-win because it ignores the current circumstances and the past history of both narratives. So it's essential to know what's going on the ground and encourage greater understanding between Arabs and Jews. And this isn't just important for Israel. It's important here in the UK, where there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism muddled up with anti-racism and anti-Zionism. People in the UK need to know about the positive things that are happening in Israel. Need to know, even if only online, they can meet a Palestinian and a Jew who are talking and listening to each other. That way we are more likely to stop stereotyping and realize that most people aren't extremists and don't hate each other. They just want to get on with their lives. And there's no reason to consider that the everyday Jew or Muslim in the street is the enemy. A better understanding of Israel leads to less ignorance and confusion about Zionism and anti-Semitism. Obviously, Jewish Israelis need more and better education in Arabic and Arab culture, and Palestinian Arabs need more and better education in Jewish culture and history. But at the moment, this issue isn't even on the political agenda, either the Israeli or the Palestinian Authority agenda. Perversely, lockdown and this awful virus has provided me with the opportunity to devote time and energy to something I've wanted to do for a long time, to try to get the disinterested to be interested and to get the interested to see both sides, to support the cooperative grassroots projects that enable Israeli Jews and Palestinians to meet and talk together, and to be able to showcase the work that's going on, work that's essential along with policy changes for a better future for the region. And there are just so many amazing projects run by inspirational people. And TalkMatters is now promoting more than 30 of these. Please do look at www.talkmatters.info at our directory to see all of them. They're projects that bring people together because of particular interests: music, sport, business, ecology, religion, and drama and art. And there are projects that bring people together because they have lost a loved one to the ongoing conflict. And they're projects that bring people together to discuss the political situation. And whether they are my particular views or not doesn't matter. I support all these projects because they enable people to talk to one another face to face. One of these projects is a wonderful eye-opening project called Roots. 2 or 3 years ago, my husband Terry and I were introduced to Roots by the United Synagogue's Israeli representative, Rabbi Gideon Sylvester. We were amazed that Israeli settlers and Palestinians were talking to each other and that we'd heard nothing about this in the UK media. Tonight, we're so lucky to have with us 2 people who are involved in the project. Rabbi Hanan is the co-founder of Roots and director of international relations. Noor Awad is an active supporter of Roots, organizing joint Palestinian-Israeli activities and speakers on behalf of Roots on many, many occasions. Before we begin with Rabbi Hanan, I'd just like to repeat what Beth said. The webinar is being recorded, so please switch off if you don't want to be seen. But I think in a way it makes a more together atmosphere if we keep our cameras on and we can feel a bit more like a live audience for our speakers. So we're going to start with Rabbi Hanan. Both speakers are going to speak till about 8:45, so for about a half an hour. And then we're going to have question and answer session, and we hope to end by 9:15. And we'll start now, please, with Rabbi Hanan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Rabbi Mason. I'm going to begin with a phrase you probably never heard, Merkaz Karama. Merkaz Karama. Merkaz is a Hebrew word, some of you might know. It means center. And Karama is a word in Arabic that means dignity, the dignity center. The dignity center is the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank / Judean Samaria / Palestine / occupied territories / disputed territory / Greater Israel. We created the Dignity Center as the flagship project of Roots, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding, nonviolence, and transformation. In the Dignity Center, before the pandemic and after the pandemic, brings together Israelis and Palestinians, local Israelis and Palestinians, people who are neighbors but have no contact with each other. And in the Dignity Center, they meet each other, whether it's in photography workshops or interfaith dialogue or summer camps or day camps or our youth movement for high school kids or the little kids play group, lots of programs. You have to understand that the Dignity Center creates common ground. And when I say common ground, I'm not using a metaphor. I'm speaking literally. You see, where we live in the West Bank, / all the things I said earlier, there's no common ground. Literally, Palestinians live in Palestinian cities or towns. Israelis live in Israeli cities or settlements. And each side is forbidden by law and by taboo to go into the side's place, other side's land, even if there were a crazy Israeli and a crazy Palestinian who wanted to meet for coffee, there's just about no place to do it. No place to do it. That's why we had to create the Dignity Center in order for the work of Roots to go forward, to bring the two sides together. And who are the two sides we bring together? I said local people, I mean neighbors, people who have never met each other before, who are afraid of each other, who are traumatized by each other, who have deep prejudice and hates against the other. And specifically, we're talking about what we call the two poles. The Israelis in Roots are Orthodox Jews, like me. They have beards. They wear tzitzit. They're usually on the right wing. They're deeply connected to the land, and they see themselves and they're seen by others as enemies of peace. They're the people who are meeting Palestinians. On the Palestinian side, a lot of them, the majority, are religious Muslims, people you would think are members of Hamas. They are Palestinian from refugee families like Noor, my partner, is going to speak another 25 minutes. People have been traumatized for generations by this conflict. And they are Palestinians who that they themselves or their relatives have been in Israeli jail for security offenses. So it's the two poles who would never think of talking to each other, who live close, so close to each other. We're bringing them together. And that's amazing. I often say that the Dignity Center is not just a community center, it is something like a mental health clinic, because the two sides are a little bit sick. I have a name for this sickness. I call it the hubris of exclusivity, the hubris of exclusivity. And it's a disease that causes you to think and feel that your story is the only story in this land. Your religion is the only true religion. Your truth is the only truth. And your people is the only people in this land. And in the Dignity Center, through the programs of Roots, we begin slowly, gradually, not everyone, but most people who come 2, 3, 4, 5 times, we begin to heal from the hubris of exclusivity to come to a place in which we can fit two truths into one heart and two peoples into one land. After I talked about the Dignity Center on one foot, I'm going to very, very briefly tell you a little bit about my story. I'm a Jew, I'm a Zionist, and I'm a settler. When I say I'm a Jew, I mean I'm a member of the Jewish people. I have a deep connection to Jewish history, and especially to the land of Israel, the cradle of Jewish civilization. And I said I'm a Zionist. I made Aliyah. I ascended to the land from New York when I was 18 years old on my own with my 2 suitcases. And I have a deep sense that the Jewish people have come back in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy after 2,000 years of exile. I see a great value in Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. I said I'm a Jew, I said I'm a Zionist, I'm also a settler, I said, which means that I see the whole land of Israel from Jordan to the Mediterranean as essentially Jewish land, not just what's within the green line of Israel proper, but all of the biblical homeland is the Holy Land that we have a deep connection to. I love where I live, in Judea, south of Jerusalem, an area called Gush Etzion, in a settlement of about 700 families called Alon Shvut. I've lived here for almost 40 years. And for 33 of those 40 years, I never met a Palestinian, even though there's a Palestinian village literally 500 meters from my front door. And 80% of the people in the area are Palestinians, but we live in different towns and villages. And we speak different language, different cultures, different religions. We have different educational systems, different legal systems, different municipalities, different calendars. We don't know the other exists. And I certainly didn't know that Palestinians exist. For me, they were like the gray, drab scenery that passes in the background of a movie, but is not part of the plot. That began to change for me about 7.5 years ago. I was driving my car in the area I live in Judea, in Gush Etzion, with 2 Protestant pastors. They were from the US. They asked me to show them around to see how biblical prophecy of Isaiah, of Jeremiah, of Zechariah are coming true before our eyes, and the people of the land, the Jewish sons and Jewish daughters, are reclaiming the land. So we drove around in my car and I showed them the houses we built. I showed them the roads we paved. I showed them the forest that we planted. And as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker on the side of the road. I picked up another hitchhiker. They stayed in the car for a few minutes. They asked to get off. They got off. And then after they left the car, one of the pastors turned to me and he said, Hanan, that was a great thing you did. You taught us a lesson in the Jewish ethics. You picked up hitchhikers. I've never seen that done before in Texas. And I said to the pastor who was sitting next to me, I said, Bob, it's not just me. Around here, we all pick up hitchhikers because we have a common vision. We trust each other. And just like everyone else, I do my best to pick up everyone who puts out his finger for a ride. I told him I tried to pick up every person who puts his finger out for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to me, and I was lying to my friends in the car. You see, I never picked up a Palestinian in my life, even though they're most of the people walking the side of the road. When I said that I pick up every person, I thought I was telling the truth, which means that either I don't see the Palestinians or I don't see them as human beings. And I felt embarrassed in front of these two pastors that I said something that revealed my deep prejudice and my blindness, to use a word that Jenny used, which is so true. I realized at that moment how blind I was, and I decided to do something about it. I said to myself, and I said to the pastors, that I'm going to meet my Palestinian neighbors next opportunity I get to make them into human beings in my consciousness. When I went home, I began this journey of trying to meet my neighbors, and I failed. I failed because there was no one can introduce me. There were no common ties. How am I gonna do this? Until it happened, long story, that I was invited to meet Palestinians. This was the last Wednesday in January 2014. It was about 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon. I left my house to go where I was supposed to go to meet Palestinians. My wife saw me opening the front door, about to walk out. She asked, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to meet Palestinians." She screamed. She said, "You can't do that, they'll kill you." And I approached my wife. I saw the terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go. But I knew that I had to do this. I walked out of the house. My heart was pounding. I was probably as afraid as she was. I didn't know what they would do to me. I'm walking through the orchards and the vineyards around Alon Shvut where I live. It was about a 23-minute walk. And I get where I'm going. I walk in this compound surrounded by a rock fence, a stone fence. There's a metal gate at the entrance. It's open. I walk in. It's a piece of Palestinian farmland. And I see something that cannot be. Cannot be. I saw about 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. They were doing the strangest thing. They were talking to each other. That doesn't happen where we come from. They were milling around, 2 here and 3 there and 4 here. I saw this Palestinian woman who wasn't talking to anyone. She was standing alone. She's dressed in brown from head to toe. I can see only her face. I walked right up to her and I said hello in English. She said hello back to me. We talked for about a minute or two until I said to her, "I can't believe that I'm talking to you." And she said back, "I can't believe that I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers." A short silence, we continued to talk, but not for a long time. Her son comes over. She introduces me. She said his name is Yazin. He's 17 years old. Yazin and I shake hands. I see he's wearing a windbreaker. And here, right over the heart, I see 3 words printed on the jacket in English. The 3 words were "Seeds of Peace." Seeds of Peace. I looked at the young man, he's a Palestinian. I looked at the jacket, it says peace. And I said to myself, peace and Palestinian, that doesn't go together. He certainly found this jacket on the floor. He doesn't know what it says, because if he knew, he wouldn't wear it because he's a Palestinian. Palestinians don't know anything about peace. All this is going through my mind. Half jokingly, I said to Yazin, "Yazin, what's this Seeds of Peace thing?" And I thought that he would tell me, "I don't know." Instead, Yazin told me that Seeds of Peace is a summer camp in Maine, USA. And it takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. Yazin said he just got back from the camp a few months ago, had a great time there. He met Israeli kids, they're friends on Facebook, and he told me he was so affected by that summer that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our two peoples. And I'm listening to Yazin, and I don't know if I can believe what he's telling me. because it contradicts everything that I think I know. Yazin was the first Palestinian who began the process of unsettling me. I was very confused. And then my confusion got even worse when his father walks over. Jamal and I shake hands. He's a short, stocky guy. We started talking. He told me that they're from Beit Umar. Beit Umar? I know Beit Umar. It's 20,000 Palestinians, only a 5-minute drive from where I live. I've had rocks thrown at my car, literally. The windshield broken as I drove by Beit Umar. Once I was driving home in the middle of the night, there was a rock machsom, a rock barrier put up in the middle of the road. I had to get out and move the big boulders, afraid I'm going to be attacked, ambushed. I have a neighbor who was killed by gunfire right where the road passes Beit Umar. I know those people in Beit Umar, they're terrorists. I say to myself, and now I'm talking to one of them. I just met his wife and his kid. It wasn't easy for me. Jamal starts telling me the story of his life. He told me, Hanan, you know, in Beit Umar, there's no Jews, there's no Israelis, there's only the Israeli soldiers who guard the entrance to the city, and they make life very difficult for us. We hate the soldiers, and by extension, we hate all the Jews. No one in Beit Umar would ever want to meet one of them over coffee. Except, he said, he had this neighbor many years ago who did want to meet Jews. And this neighbor would go to the city of Jericho, about an hour and 10-minute drive from Beit Umar, for a Jewish-Muslim dialogue. And Jamal tells me, one day my friend said, Jamal, you want to come? And Jamal told me, Hanan, he said, I said to my friend, I'll never, ever come with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. But the friend wouldn't get off his back and kept trying to convince him to come. And eventually Jamal tagged along. And Jamal told me, Hanan, he said, the Jews and the Muslims sat in a big circle in this room in Jericho, and I, Jamal, did not participate. I sat in the corner, but I listened to them. And they talked. I heard what they were saying. At one point near the end, one of the Israelis, Jew, walked up to me, Jamal said. And as he started coming closer, I was really afraid what he'd do to me. He came right up to me and he forced me to shake his hand. Then he asked me questions I had to answer him. It was really, really unpleasant to have a conversation with a Jew. And when he finally finished the conversation and walked away, Jamal said he wiped the sweat off his brow and ran to the bathroom to wash the filth off his hand from touching a Jew. And he vowed never to come back to this cursed place. Jamal went home, had a big argument with his wife. She was very upset that he went there, and they agreed they'll never tell anyone about it, never go back. Long story short, somehow Jamal's friend convinced him to go back with his wife. And they went back again and again, and then they brought their kids. And Jamal tells me, he says, Hanan, after a few months, I realized that where I thought there was only an enemy, I met a human being and a partner, and it changed me. I listened to Jamal speak, and I was totally confounded. How could this be? How can a Muslim, a terrorist, a Palestinian be transformed? See a partner in the Jewish people? I was really, really losing it. I didn't know what to do with myself. I started feeling conflict in my stomach that this is so challenging. But Jamal doesn't stop talking. He told me another story. He said, Hanan, you know that the little kids in Beit Umar, when they see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. I said, Jamal, why do they start to cry? And he was confused by the fact that I didn't understand. Until he said, it's the kippah you have on your head, and it's the beard, and it's the tzitzit hanging from your pants, because everyone who looks like you, they carry a submachine gun. He does like this, and they walk into Beit Umar and kill the kids. Silence. I did not know what to say. I thought this is borderline anti-Semitism. What is he talking about? What crazy stereotypes he has. But somehow I understood that my task at that moment is not to tell him off. It's not to fly in a rage and contradict him. It's to listen. I understood that this was a moment of blessing, because for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And if I can just hold that, I'll be a better human being. I didn't say anything. How is the conversation going to continue? A light bulb goes off in my mind, and I see in my mind's eye my neighbors walking out in the fields for a hike, for Bible study. And of course, most of the people are carrying guns. We're afraid of the Palestinians. We always carry guns. And I suddenly realized it must be terribly frightening to the Palestinians to see these strange looking people carrying guns. So I said to Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he looked at me as if I fell from the moon. He said, you're crazy. You're not afraid of us. We're afraid of you. And I was even more confused. Later, we sat in a circle, 15 Israelis, 15 Palestinians. And Ali Abu Awad, the convener of the event, the man who owned the land, he introduced himself. He said, I'm Ali Abu Awad from a proud Palestinian family. We, for many generations, lived in Kubeba. In 1948, Israel came and turned it into Kiryat Gat, and we were forced to leave. We came to Beit Umar here in the West Bank. In 1967, Israel came again and occupied us. Occupied, he said? He said, Israeli occupation. I'd never heard those two words before in my life from a human being in my presence. I'd read in the newspaper, heard on the radio, but a human being telling me he lives under Israeli occupation, that means my occupation. What is he talking about? I've never seen this thing before. When I drive in the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Yehuda, Judah, I don't see occupation. I see return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? And this Ali Abu Awad guy, this Palestinian, is telling us that our Jewish triumph of the spirit is his nation's tragedy. And our nation's righteousness is his nation's suffering. It was really, really hard for me to hear that. I didn't know what he was talking about. He wasn't trying to give a political discourse. He wasn't trying to convince us, just telling the story of his life. But it challenged me deeply. It contradicted what I knew. I went home that day, confused, confounded, upset. I remember walking back and forth, pacing in my study, feeling my stomach's falling out. I'm getting so nauseous from this conflict inside my soul. He says it's Palestine. I say it's Israel. He says they belong here. I say we belong here. He says this is occupation. I say this is liberation of the land. And I realized that I didn't know anything of the background, what he's talking about. I had to figure this out. I went and searched out Ali Abu Awad to that same piece of land. I met him. It wasn't just me. There were other Israelis who wanted to meet Ali. There were other Palestinians who wanted to meet these Israelis who were meeting Ali. We began to talk. And again and again and again. I don't know how it happened, but somehow we set unwritten and unspoken ground rules that we're not there to tell the other that you're wrong. We're not there to tell them off. We're there to do two things, to tell stories and to listen to stories. The Palestinians told us their story of hundreds of years of life in that land, Palestine. They told us about the Zionist movement displacing them. They told us about living under occupation. They told us about what it's like to live behind bars in Israeli jail, to have your mother in jail, your father, you yourself, what it's like to be involved in resistance against the occupation. And it was so hard to hear. We wanted to run away sometimes and tell them that this is ridiculous, it can't be. It hurt to listen, but we kept listening. And then came our turn to talk. We told them about 3,000 years of Jewish history, about exile, about 2,000 years of being away from home in Europe, in North Africa, in the Middle East. We talked about coming home with the Zionist movement. And when a Jew says he's coming home to this land, it's like a dagger in the heart of the Palestinian. And we began to see how each side knows only its story, how each side builds its identity upon the nullification of the other side's identity. Each side says, we can tell you who you are. The Palestinians say, you're Jews, that's great. The Quran loves Judaism, but there's no such thing as the Jewish people. You're a faith, not a people. You don't have to be in this land. Why did you come and take it from us? Go back to Russia, go back to New York. And the Israelis say to the Palestinians, Palestinian, there's no such thing as Palestinian. You're just an Arab. There never was a Palestinian state. So go back to Lebanon, go back to Syria. We each think we can tell the other who we are. Whereas we began to understand we have to listen and let them tell us who they are. They are who they say they are. And that's how we founded Roots. After months of discussion, I remember Ali Abu Awad one day saying, Hanan, it looks like we have to be able to fit two truths into one heart. Two truths into one heart and two peoples into one land. It was a real process for me of challenge and transformation. I'd never met a Palestinian before. I only knew my story. And suddenly I began to hear there's another truth, there's another story. That doesn't mean that my story is false, because you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. I firmly believe that the land is the land of Israel, from the Mediterranean to the Jordan. But I also believe today that that same land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean is Palestine. They're both true at the same time. There's no way around that. I'm a Zionist, I'm a Jew, I'm a settler. Our partners are proud Palestinians. We're not giving up on our rights. They're not giving up on their rights. But we're realizing that no one's going to get their rights if they don't acknowledge the other side's existence, the other side's reality, the other side's legitimacy. We are fated to live in this land together. Neither side is going to disappear. The question is if we're going to do it out of violence and occupation and oppression and resistance, or we're going to do it out of a mutual acceptance. It's so hard. It's easy to say those words. You guys perhaps don't know, perhaps you do know how hard it is for me to say these words. I remember how I cried the first time we came up with the Roots vision statement, and I signed it, that says that we envision a new social and political reality that recognizes both sides' historical connectedness to this land and grants dignity, equality, and human rights to both sides. It was so hard because there's a sense of being a traitor to your own people, but there's no other way. That's the foundation of Roots. I'm in the last 3 or 4 minutes, if Jenny's looking at the clock.
I'm aware that we're off time, thank you.
In the last 2 or 3 minutes, we're not political. Roots is not political, but the reason we're not political is not because we ignore politics. It's not because we think the present political situation is good. The present political situation is bad, it's evil, it's wrong, and it's oppressive. It has to be changed. We have to change. We have to take responsibility to change it. But we in Roots have come to the conclusion that the people are not ready for political solution at this point, because this conflict is more than just politics. It's not just security, and it's not just resources. This is a conflict over identity. Who are we and who are they? Is it the land of Israel, the land of Palestine? And therefore, if the peoples won't first be involved in dialogue and human recognition, then there's nothing to talk about. Politics will just blow up in our faces, like the Oslo Accord blew up in our faces because there's no recognition. The people most connected to the land and to history and to their identity on both sides blew it up. The radical settlers and the religious Muslims, Hamas. We believe that before or concurrently with political negotiations, there has to be a human process of summer camps, of dialogue, of interfaith dialogue, of music workshops, of the Run for Reconciliation, which we did today in the Jordan Valley. We ran together, and then we had a ceremony afterwards. We have to see the humanity on the other side. We have to develop empathy and trust for the other side. And that's the only way we'll be able to create the human groundwork for these two people to live together in this little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Hanan. And now we're going to go over to Noor Awad, please.
Thank you, Hanan. Thank you, Jenny. I am amazed that Hanan still have the energy to talk today after running the marathon. You are young, Hanan.
Thank you.
So, hello everyone. It's good to be with you here tonight. My name is Noor, and I will share my part of the story on how we get to do the work that we do today. How someone like me, a Palestinian, would join such an initiative with Israeli settlers today. Something that most of my society would not accept for obvious reasons. My story, like many other Palestinians, if not most of Palestinians, goes back to 1948. I mean, in 1948, my family were expelled from their village in southwest of Jerusalem to a refugee camp here in Bethlehem. They stayed in the refugee camp and thought that this will be a short time for them, and once the war will end, they will go back. But what they thought it was a short time turned out to be now more than 73 years. My parents were born here in Bethlehem my father was born in 1957. My mother was born in 1964. Both of them had lived under the Israeli occupation after 1967 in the West Bank. My father actually wanted to leave the country by late 1980s. He left to Jordan for a while, my mother as well, and that's why I was born there. I wasn't born here. I was born in Amman in Jordan in 1991. And 2 years after that, the Oslo peace process was signed. So for the first time in their life, after many wars and conflict and living under occupation, now in the early 90s, there was the talk about the peace and about ending the occupation and establishing an independent state of Palestine. So like many people at that time, my parents were very hopeful and that finally now they can come back to Palestine and live a normal life. So we moved back in 1995. And I usually say that for me as a kid, back then, living here, I didn't really saw much of the conflict. I wasn't affected by the conflict that much. On one hand, I remember that, my father, who used to work in Jerusalem, and my family had a very stable life when we moved back here at the beginning. Also, on the other hand, that our ability to move around and to travel and our life was much better before the year 2000, before the second Intifada. And I was a kid, as I said. I didn't understood the complexity. I'm not saying that the occupation and the conflict disappeared in those years, but that's what I remember. That's my experience back then. And in the year 2000, the second Intifada started. The second Palestinian uprising started as a result of the failure of the peace talks and the peace process. A very violent chapter of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And at that time, my life started to be directly affected by the conflict. My father lost his job in Jerusalem. Where I live in Bethlehem, it became very actually dangerous sometimes because of the shooting and the Israeli army invasion to the city, and the clashes with the army most of the time. There was no schools to go to. In general, those years of the second Intifada became very. I found myself living in the middle of the conflict, and it became very difficult and not safe to be here in a way. So growing up during the Intifada, I start to think about my identity and who I am, and what does it mean to be a Palestinian living here, a third generation from the Nakba, from the catastrophe, what my grandparents lived in their time, what my parents living and what I'm living now. And I start to ask myself a question of, will I have a normal life here in my country? And it felt like that I will never have a normal life here in Palestine. We will always live in a conflict. We will always live under this occupation. And if I want to have a normal life, I should maybe think to move out, to move somewhere else, to leave it. So that's how I thought about it for a while. But then at some point, I start to think also about my generation role in this situation that we live. What do I mean by that? I mean, when we come to talk about the conflict, when we talk about 1948 or 67 or 73 or any, the history of this conflict, and by the word we, I'm referring to my generation on my side, people my age. Of course, there is Israel that occupies us today, but we also blame our side. I mean, we blame the past generations for not doing enough, for not taking responsibility. I say, if my grandparents, if they resisted in 1948, if they didn't leave their village, if they somehow fought, we wouldn't end up becoming refugees now for generations. We wouldn't end up in this situation. So we criticize and we say it's the responsibility of the past generation. But now it's our time. So what should we do? And I thought that I should go and move somewhere else. But if I move and most of the people my age do the same, then who would stay here to change the situation? Who would stay in Palestine to change it? What are we doing to the next generation? So from this point of view, I start to believe that no, we have responsibility. We have responsibility toward the situation, and we need, even if we didn't choose that situation to be like this, but we have a responsibility to fix it and to improve the situation in our country. But then the question, what to do? Today, when I say the word conflict to my people, referring to the situation, most of my people wouldn't understand why I'm choosing this word, especially people my age. I mean, for us, we don't feel we are in a conflict with Israel because we don't feel we are like equal in a way. They are occupying us. They have the army that controls our life. We found ourselves this way. So it's not a conflict for us. That's what my generation thinks mostly. It's the occupation. The power imbalance. That's what we experience. That's what we live under. That's why it's hard for my generation and my people to understand the word conflict. And I use it to basically to include the context that actually it didn't only started in 1967. It didn't only started when the military occupation began in the West Bank and Gaza. Because before that, we had the Jordanian occupation, and before that, we had the British Mandate and the struggle against that British Mandate and the Zionist movement. So that's also part of that. That's the roots of the conflict. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because I want to clarify, when you start to think about taking responsibility, then you think about the circumstances and the situation today, and you think, of course, any people who are under occupation, they have to resist if they want to bring this occupation to an end. That's how most of nations got rid of occupation, because you resisted. And the idea of resistance is so much connected with violence. Resistance means violence against their soldiers, against their settlers, against their people. So that's what some of my generation or many of my people think. And then I came to learn also about non-violent resistance. Not necessarily, or not the idea of using violence all the time. But the point is that whether if I'm talking about non-violent resistance or violent resistance, it's not by starting a partnership. It's not by seeing the Israelis in any case becoming partners. It's always seeing the Israelis as the enemies and obstacles, and that's the reality that I grew up with, that I grew up in. So in 2014, I finished my tour guiding course. I joined the tour guiding course here in Bethlehem, where I live, and I started guiding Christian tourist groups mostly around Bethlehem and my country. And I actually start to meet with more tourists who are interested to know about the reality, about the political situation. and guiding sometimes specifically like geopolitical tours of groups with students and foreigners who are, as I said, interested to learn about and understand the situation and the reality we have here. Some of them, or most of them, they are familiar with the Israeli narrative. They came already hearing the Israeli point of view or point of views. And it's their first chance, or it's their first time to hear the Palestinian side. And from one group to another, in February 2016, I remember I took this group of American students, part of members of a program called Middle East Studies, to the city of Hebron, in the south of the West Bank. And I took them to Hebron that day, and the purpose was to visit the city, learn about it, and see the religious and historical sites like the Ibrahimi Mosque, the tomb of the patriarchs, and also, of course, learn about the geopolitical reality and the occupation, about the settlements and the Israeli control of part of the city, and all of that. And at the end of the day, after being guided by me and learning about the life in Hebron and the reality there, we arranged actually a meeting for the group with someone who would represent the settlers community in Hebron. This is what the group asked. They spent before that a week on the Israeli side in Tel Aviv and in Israel proper, but they didn't have a chance to meet with a settler. And they also wanted to use the time there to meet with someone who represents the Israeli settlers from Hebron. So we got that. And it wasn't my first time. But in order to clarify, this, I actually, in these meetings, I couldn't attend even if I want to. What do I mean? I mean, when I bring my group to meet with the settler, they go inside one of the settlements in Hebron. And I, as a Palestinian, I actually have to stay outside to wait my group until they finish. Something has to do with the movement restrictions and security from the Israeli side. So that's why I'm not present at the meeting. But I know in general what the settlers will be saying about us. I know what the Israelis are saying about us, or I thought that I actually knew. So, however, what we did that day, we sat somewhere. We actually gathered somewhere where me and the settler, the speaker, was present at the same time. And I remember him talking to us, to my group, and sharing with us his personal story, why he decided to move from the US. He grew up there as an American Jew, decided to move to Israel at some point to become a citizen, but not anywhere in Israel. He decided to live in the West Bank and in the heart of the conflict in the occupied territories in Hebron. And he started to talk about why Jews are moving there and why they want to live there. But his whole story was focused on two things, as far as I remember. One, the denial of the occupation. He couldn't recognize and talk about the occupation, the reality of the military control of the West Bank. And for me to hear someone for the first time in my presence denying the occupation, I was a bit in a shock. And how can I react to that? Because what do you mean? It's so obvious. Wherever I turn my head as a Palestinian, however, I live here in the West Bank, I'm surrounded by the occupation, by the Israeli military authorities here. It exists on different levels of my life. What do you mean that the occupation doesn't exist? I was asking myself. And then the second point that he focused his story on was the denial of my national identity. He denied that there is anything legitimate called the Palestinian people or the Palestinian national identity. He referred to us as Arabs, as in Hanan actually used as an example in his speech, that we are only Arabs, and we have 22 Arab countries to go to. That's what he said. And after hearing this speech of denial, I was very frustrated with him. He actually, in a way, affirmed what I thought before about settlers. And I felt more animosity between us than before meeting the settler in Hebron. On the way back to Bethlehem with my group, we had a last meet. We were supposed to have a last meeting, and that meeting was with Rav Hanan Schlesinger from Roots. And it was actually, I wasn't really sure about what Roots is. I thought he will be talking to us about the life in Gush Etzion as a settler. But then I learned on the way that it's a people-to-people initiative, and they are Palestinians and Israeli settlers together, and they are working for peace and understanding. And I was shocked. I mean, what are you talking about? I couldn't really understand that because in our context, to hear about it, to hear for the first time about such a project between Palestinians and settlers, you feel as a Palestinian that the intentions behind this project are not, or is not clean. There is something suspicious about it. Why settlers want to make peace? Peace means for them they have to leave the Palestinian territories. They have to leave Judea and Samaria. So, however, I came to Roots with many questions in my head and a lot of hesitance and suspicion, as I say. We sat there, we met with Rav Hanan, and he started sharing with us the same story that he shared with you now. I think even a little bit longer. He talked in more details. And there was the moment when Hanan spoke about the truth, about how he realized at some point that the truth does not only exist on his side, but also it exists on my side. And listening to his stories and to his story and to the story with Jamal and his encounters with other Palestinians, I felt Roots very confused and challenged and overwhelmed, because I felt that the person I have just met and the voice I've listened to was a voice of recognition and empathy. I'm only using those two words to describe the process. Recognition and empathy, two big words, and might sound vague to you. What do you mean by empathy and recognition? The fact that Hanan was able to think out of the box that he found himself in, and to start empathize with my people, and start to empathize with our situation and what we go through, and improve his understanding of our reality. And recognition on many levels, not just the recognition between two political entities, not just the recognition between two countries, but the recognition between two peoples and two identities, which seems to be nearly impossible. How can you recognize both Israeli Zionist identity and Palestinian national identity at the same time? The two things were founded in a way against each other. You can even say contradicting each other. But Hanan showed me that this is actually possible. And he showed me that we can have the ability to hold both truths together and to have both things together at the same time. As I said, I left Roots confused, and I thought more about it, and I went back to Roots. And after meeting with other Palestinians and Israeli activists, I decided to join.
Lovely. I'm going to have to stop you there, Noor. Thank you, because we want to have time for some questions. We need to finish by 9:50. Thank you so much, Noor and Rabbi Hanan. And the questions have been coming in fast and furiously, and also with lots of praise for your openness and for your stories, for sharing them with us. So thank you for that. Can I start with a question to you, Noor? And it says, is anti-normalization prevalent among Palestinians living under occupation?
Yes, it is. So many of my people actually believe that the work we do is a type of normalization. And to be clear, what do we mean by normalization? Is that what we are achieving at the end of the day is friendship between people and personal relationships that's not going, and it's not talking about the political reality. That's not addressing the issue that we are suffering from, which is the occupation. And that's how many people define this work as type of normalization. That's not going to bring the end of the occupation. Many people say that we have participated in the 90s in the peace camps. We have participated in the early 2000s, and it achieved nothing. In my opinion, this is my personal opinion, I think that also the idea of anti-normalization was misinterpreted and misused to a certain extent. The accusation of anti-normalization or normalization became very broad and used to describe any type of activity with Israeli, gathering or meeting with Israelis. There are, for example, left-wing organizations that might be organizing protests against the occupation, making action on the ground, bringing Palestinians and Israelis to protest against the Israeli occupation. And there could be just this, like a gathering between some Israelis and Palestinians. That's not necessarily an action against the occupation, just to sit and talk and meet. Now, both these activities could be described for my society as normalization. That's why I'm saying that the accusation itself or the word became vague and misused and misinterpreted. The anti-normalization movement or the anti-normalization that came out in 2004 before the BDS movement was supposed to be guidelines for who are the Israelis we can work with and who are the Israelis we can't work with. The ones who recognize Palestinian national rights based on the international law, and the ones who don't recognize Palestinian national rights according to the international law. But then it became misused.
Okay, thank you. And a question for Rabbi Hanan. How do you see the ways in which intergenerational trauma among the Jewish people fuels this conflict?
The question assumes that I see intergenerational conflict, intergenerational trauma fueling this conflict, and indeed I do. I think that the trauma goes back actually thousands of years. The Jewish people are traumatized not just by the Holocaust, but by most of our history. I want to give an example to everyone. It's now just 2 weeks before Passover, and we all know, those of us who are Jewish, that we have a central line in the Passover Haggadah, the Passover liturgy, that says, "B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu lachaloteinu." In every generation, they rise against us to annihilate us. First it was the Egyptians, and then it was later generations, and it culminated in the Holocaust. That effort in every generation to annihilate the Jewish people. Well, that song, that line from the Haggadah has been given many different tunes, and it's a song on the radio in Israel beginning right around now, 2 weeks before Passover. Everyone sings it, everyone knows it. And it's very clear that to most Israelis, the song is talking not only about the Egyptians and the Crusades and the Holocaust, it's also talking about the Palestinians. In other words, our basic mindset is that all of the others with a big O are out to get us, and the Palestinians are just the next iteration of that onslaught. So that's just one example that we have part of our background, our baggage, our religion, our consciousness, our identity is preventing us from seeing human beings and the Palestinians on many levels.
Thank you, Rabbi Hanan. And now there's a question for both of you. I'm interested to know from both speakers how much support they have in their own communities and whether they are at any risk from doing this work. Shall we start with you, Rabbi Hanan?
Okay, so with me, so there's no risk, there's no danger in the work we do. I'm talking from myself and from my Israeli colleagues. but it's absolutely true that we are going against the grain, against the current of the way people normally think in our community. And the majority of people are not in favor of the work we do. Some of them see it certainly as traitorous, as weakening the national resolve. Many accuse us of being blind and of being naive, that we think that the Palestinians exist, that we think there's an occupation, that we think that we can and should talk to them, that we think that there's some truth and humanity on their side. We're accused of being naive and unrealistic. I can't tell you what percentage of the people in my community believe in what we're doing. I don't know if it's 5% or 10% or 15% or 20%, but it's certainly not the majority. We have a lot of work to do, and we're trying to do that work.
Thank you. And Noor, in your community?
On my side, I'll say that most of the people, as I said before, will be against this work. Because the definition of peace or work for peace was for a long time connected to the idea of a two-state solution. So when I come and say that I am in a project with Israeli settlers, there is no support for that. There is no political and legal excuse for the work that I do. That's why I'm not just, putting myself in a risk or like in a confrontation with my people, but also with the authorities, with the Palestinian Authority. Now, I'll say that how we managed to do this work so far for more than 5 years is that because we are on the roots side, the Palestinians, we have good connections with officials in the authority, in the Palestinian Authority, and the security apparatus. On the people side, I'll say that 70%, the majority of my people are skeptical and suspicious about the work and the intentions of this organization. Again, why settlers want to make peace, why settlers want to have peace. When I joined Roots, some of my friends, got very upset with me. They didn't really accept the reasons that I told them and what I told them about Roots. I have quoted Hanan and other Israeli partners many times to them, but it didn't matter. What I'm doing is wrong, and therefore they stopped talking to me. And I have friends who actually supported me and who actually started joining and asking about what they can do, and they joined some of the activities. But as I say, it's still very difficult to publicize more our work without having a clear vision and without having support and like coverage from people on the top and in the authorities to feel enough confident and safe to go out more to the public. Because in a short way, I'll say that Roots does not provide a clear answer to the solution, what the solution is. It does not say, okay, it's not the two-state solution, let's go for one. It does not say a one-state solution or a confederation. Or it's not. We are not at Roots trying to answer the political question, although we thought about it many times and we have discussed it, and we have our members, they have different ideas of what the solution should be. There are supporters of a two-state solution, there are supporters of confederation, there are supporters of one-state solution. But the idea itself of talking with settlers, it's crossing many red lines. And that's why it's difficult for my people to understand the work we are doing.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you for being so open and honest about that. If we are to finish at 9:15, we're going to take the last question now so that we can finish on time. And that is about us here in the UK, what we can do here in the UK, which would be most helpful for your projects. Perhaps I'll come to you first of all, Rabbi Hanan.
I would like to share my screen for that, which I'm doing right now.
Fine.
So here's the screen. Here are about 10 things you can do. You can visit friendsofroots.net, which is our website, and sign up for the quarterly newsletter there. You can visit my personal website that has articles that go deep into the things we deal with in Roots. On Facebook, you can like like us, Friends of Roots. Of course, you could donate to us through the website. You can invite us to speak in your synagogue, as you just have, which is wonderful. We want to speak in other synagogues and churches, and especially in mosques. You can volunteer to work with us. The screen says the American Friends of Roots, but now it's the International Friends of Roots. We're looking for board members with experience in management. We're looking for accountants. We're looking for thinkers. We're looking for activists. We're looking for people in social media. And we're especially looking for people who are part of the Muslim community in Great Britain and can connect us to that community so we can build connections, not just with Jewish synagogues, but with mosques and with Muslims. The screen says that when you visit Israel and Palestine, here's my cursor, visit Israel and Palestine, not one or the other. Meet people from both sides and try to meet people in an organization that are involved in reconciliation. Visit the Dignity Center. Young people, even non-young people, can devote 2 or more months to interning with us, either on the ground or digitally. And here, look at this, fill your Facebook page and social media with positive stories. Everyone spreading the bad news, take upon yourself to look for the good news like Jenny is doing and to spread the good news. It's there, but it's hard to find. And the more good news people read, the more hope we create, the more hope we create, the more hope there is, the more hopeful the situation will become. Encourage your family and friends, house of worship, to learn the narrative of, to empathize with, and to support both Israelis and Palestinians. Learn Hebrew and learn Arabic. Learn both languages. Reach out to people of other religions and ethnicities, learn about them, join a creative framework for dialogue. So what can you do? All these things. And the truth is, I'm sorry to say it, but the most important thing for us is to support us financially, because without at least another $5 million, we won't do what we know we can do and we have to do to create a better future.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. I
will just say,
yes.
Jenny, I will just say that what you can do also, that again, like meeting with Palestinians in the UK, in Great Britain, like get to know more Palestinians and get to know more Muslims. That's what will help us.
Thank you. Yes, and that's what we really are trying to do. Thank you. And listening to people like you both makes me certain that TalkMatters is going on the right way, and that it's absolutely essential that we get to know people one-to-one, get to know Muslims, get to know Jews, get to know Arab Palestinians, get to know Israeli Jewish settlers and people who live in Israel within the Green Line. And this is really the very first step on the very complicated journey to a brighter future for the region. I'd really like to end with the Chief Rabbi Mervis, and he was talking about the help that Woodside Park Shul are giving to a Nigerian asylum seeker. He said that feeling a sense of responsibility to reach out to those around us, whether near or far, is a fundamental Jewish precept. And so for TalkMatters, that means helping more Jews to meet Palestinians and vice versa, all helping to have the right people and the institutions in place when the new day eventually does dawn, a day that celebrates Palestinian freedom and independence alongside a secure Jewish homeland in Israel. Rabbi Typhon of the Ethics in the Ethics of the Fathers said, "It is not for you to complete the task, but neither are you free to stand aside from it." So please support Roots, look at TalkMatters website, look at what we're doing, support us to bring more organizations to the UK so that people get to know more about the positive things that are happening in Israel, Palestine. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much, Rabbi Hanan. Thank you, Noor, so much as well. And I know it's really late for you now. You're 2 hours ahead of us, so we really do appreciate you being here. Thank you, Rabbi David, for allowing TalkMatters and Roots to be here this evening and to talk about talking. Thank you.
I just wanted I just wanted to come in and say thank you on all of our behalves as a synagogue, on behalf of everyone here. Firstly, to Noor and Hanan, to Rav Hanan. I did a master's in conflict resolution in divided society and went to Israel-Palestine. I was saying to Noor, I remember going to Bethlehem and thinking on this one hand, how wonderful it was to go to Bethlehem as part of Eretz Israel. On the other hand, how wonderful it was to go and see part of Palestine. And I think that's the most important and brave, courageous, but massively critical thing for us to be able to look at the land as both the land of Israel and Palestine, a story which has such romantic and historical importance for Palestinian people who lost many towns and villages, and for whom the land is really important. So I think that it's so inspiring. It's an approach that's inspired me. And I'm really pleased that you've all heard that tonight. So again, thank you to Noor, thank you to Rav Khan, and to Jenny for all the work you do. It is superb. What energy you've got. What energy you've got. And I got to know your son first. Now I know.
Energy than me.
No, I was about to say, no, I know where he gets it from. So, so Jenny, you do great work, and for bringing roots to the community. And I hope more communities will listen, because this message is a message that has to go out more. That where I say I have my truth, that cannot exist in a vacuum without me understanding the truth of the other as well, and how they can live together. So thanks to everyone. And if you all want to also mute yourself and give a big clap, that's our very sort of British, Muswell Hill way of doing it. A literal physical clap. Unmute yourself, give a massive clap to our amazing guest.
Thank you.
Mashtoda.
And thanks to Beth as well. We didn't thank Beth for the rehearsal she gave me and all the help you've given me. Thank you, Beth. And
Beth deserves a lot of thanks, because Beth has kept this program going for months, and we've had some really fascinating speakers. This will be, it has been recorded and will be on our YouTube channel, and you can look at Muswell Hill Synagogue's YouTube channel. It has weeks of really fascinating speeches and stuff on the Chagim, and you might get a little bit from me as well if you look as well. Find it.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to stay on, I'm willing to answer questions privately, if anyone wants to continue.
There you are. That's 11:50. It's 11:20 in Israel. Look at that. And thank you to David Neal, I think, as well, for giving me some interesting tips on my my backgrounds, which are now the right way around. So it's a what I'll do is I'll take shall I take you off spotlight?
Yeah.
And then everyone else.
On the other side is another chicken.
Yeah, then they're not moving.
No.
Oh, there you are. So you can all say goodbye or ask a question or
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Thank you.
Yes, Lindsay.
Lindsay's Dr. Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Had to ask.
Rabbi Hanan, can I ask you a question?
First, tell everyone how we know each other.
Oh, so Rav Hanan was my first Gemara teacher when I lived in Israel between 1993 and 1998. So we met each other, and we also met each other as part of an Israel-Palestine trip that I made in 2017. Anyway, I was going to ask Rabbi how, so you spoke about living in Alon Shvut and that community in the Gush area. And I was just wondering I don't know what it is you're doing now actually, other than Roots. So I'm just wondering about the educational system, because I know that you also mentioned that, about whether Roots goes into schools, because you're talking about with adults. And I wondered what projects were actually in the education, which I know about the Hand in Hand project. There's 6 now Hand in Hand schools. But what about the other schools where basically Arabs and Jews are separate? How does that work? And does Roots do anything?
So my personal impression is that the situation is very bad. In our schools, we don't teach to hate Arabs, but we willy-nilly teach to not see them, to be blind to them.
Oh, insurance.
and that's that's a deep prejudice that develops. Like I said earlier, I hinted that people don't see Palestinians, they see Arabs. They don't understand there's an identity here. And that comes from our schools. The schools don't make the students aware of anything beyond us, our story, our return to land. And of course, I believe in our return to land deeply. But what happens when you only teach your story, our story, you end up locking the students into the disease that I mentioned, what I call the hubris of exclusivity. So you're not capable of seeing the other side as anything but a two-dimensional character or a threat and a terrorist. Roots does go into schools very much, but the religious schools are the last to let us in. The schools in Gush Etzion are the last to let us in. We speak in lots of schools around Israel, and it's usually the schools that are considered to be more progressive and more liberal that love to hear us. But those who have to hear us, of course, don't want to hear us. In Gush Etzion, there are some more open schools. Rav Steinsaltz Zitzal has a high school where we've spoken. Rav Riskin has a program, has actually 2 high school programs where we've spoken. Rav Riskin's Yeshiva Gvoha, his Hester Yeshiva, we partner with them. That's, of course, a bright spot. And of course, we have our own children's program for little kids. We have, elementary school kids. We have a program for, middle school kids. And we have our high school program, our youth movement, which is amazing. 30 kids coming together, 15 from each side, to undergo a deep program of understanding of this narrative and dialogue.
And can I say, Lindsay, that I've been involved with the primary school at Neve Shalom Wahat HaSalam for a long, long time. And there they are Jewish and Arab children together. But of course, it is a very secular place, so it's rather different. But it's still worth saying that the great work that they are doing at that school.
Thank you.
Right.
I saw questions in the chat that I can't read because I'm talking, but if the people who mentioned questions in the chat, I see I have a problem with my chat. I see Iman wrote something.
I read out her question.
Ah, okay.
2 questions she had. I read those out, yes.
I can't believe there's no more questions. How could that be?
Okay.
Ask us things. Yeah, Nora's here.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, this is Mr. Jenny here. Probably the less energetic of the family. But could I ask both of you how you see the future?
Nora, you want to take that question?
You mean, how do we see the future in terms of a political solution, or
of what you're doing, the future of what you're doing at Roots? How do you see that? What's the goal?
I think that despite that, our work is like, in a way, I presented our work to be very rare thing to have and rare thing to do, and it is. I think that it has a potential because the political paradigm for so long time had been stuck now. The idea to implement a 2-state solution never succeeded, and the attempts to enforce it has caused more problems actually than ease the situation. And it feels like even if people are not necessarily active at Roots, there are much more, I see today, there are much more interactions between Palestinians and Israelis and Israeli settlers, especially here in the West Bank. And that's because the reality enforces that. It enforces that both sides to deal with each other. And it's still, mostly the relationship is like an economical relationship. And mostly it's the Palestinians who are working in the settlements or working with or for the settlers. But even in this classical, economical relationship working for, I also see that the boundaries are expanded and the people are getting to know each other. And despite the fear and the prejudice and the hatred on both sides, there is also the curiosity to know, because we are kind of like living so close to each other. So I've noticed that even outside of Roots, that people become more curious to know what's happening in this Palestinian town or this village or this Israeli settlement, and still the gap is big between us, and it feels sometimes we are living in two different worlds. But I'm saying that the future is that Palestinians and Israelis realizing day after day that we are living together, and there are more connections, and that's happening between our people. So that's how I see the future. That Roots will eventually grow, because that's becoming the norm. Despite the fact that the two-state solution had failed.
Thank you. If there are
Can I add
yes,
some
please add a little, and then we must let Beth get to bed. She's the administrator, she's been working hard, but yes, please do, Rabbi Hanan.
I just wanted to say that Roots has to expand 1,000-fold. We have to change minds and attitudes, and we have to reach at least 20% of the local population in Judea and Samaria, and then there'll be a change. Then the people will reach a tipping point. The people will demand of their leaders, political leaders, a change. And we are expanding. We began with our center in Gush Etzion, the Dignity Center. Today we have another center in the Jordan Valley where we had our run for reconciliation today. We have a third center in Samaria, the area between Ramallah and Shechem, Nablus. So Roots is growing.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Hanan. Thank you so much, Noor. Thank you, Beth, and good night.
Thank you all. Thank you for a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody, and thank
Thank
you for
you.
joining us.
Thank you.